So, Nikki, we're ecstatic to have you here. We're ecstatic to be, first of all, just to make this known because we've been scheming and dreaming on this for a minute, for several
That's right.
months. And I think what would be helpful today is, first of all, let the people know who you are. So I'll give you an opportunity to do that. And then we should go like super duper high level,
Okay.
like around what is this thing that you're going to dedicate a whole podcast to, Mezcal. And then even though I don't have all of my meta mezcals on me at the moment, I am holding, of course. I have a couple other treats that I thought we could taste through. So,
I have some treats too.
okay, good. So then, and our vessels, and we can talk about all that.
Perfect.
Cool. So let's start off with you just making an introduction to yourself and particularly in context to Mezcal, how your past brought you to your work in this field.
Sure. So I'm Nikki. I have been living in Mexico since 2007 and studied abroad in Oaxaca as a 19-year-old in 2005, which was my first encounter with mezcal, with Mexico, with Oaxaca. And I think in some ways that trip marked me for the rest of my life. And it wasn't until 2018. I'm celebrating my 3-year anniversary in Oaxaca in like a week or two that I was able to actually find a way to be here full time. So I started working in the art world, art, architecture, design, as a managing editor for books, and working at a gallery in contemporary art. Was working in film, was working in food, and I started a project in 2011 called Pichon, sourcing ingredients from the canals of Xochimilco, the Chinampa system, with this kind of pop-up restaurant then, which is what really got me into food systems.
And that's the first time I heard about you too. I
Yeah,
kept hearing there was this rad girl in Mexico City who was working on the chinampas. Yeah, so sorry, go ahead, continue.
yeah. So it's been a long and circuitous journey that has brought me to where I am today. But one introduction to Max Rosenstock, who is my business partner and co-founder.
Shout out to Max.
Yeah, shout out to Max. Really opened up the world of mezcal and particularly gave me the opportunity to meet the producers of Logoche, who are the producers that we work with today. So that was in 2012, 2013. And I started working with Mezcal in the events that I was producing. And Max would graciously leave me with a large stash of Mezcal at the house every time he was coming through en route to Oaxaca or on his way back to Oakland. And slowly but surely, I started learning about this incredible spirit and getting to know all of the really amazing people who are, working in
Making
mezcal
it
and preserving the craft, making it. Yeah.
definitely. So let's talk about mezcal. The part of the reason that we wanted to have this podcast is because it occupies an interesting cultural space, in that it is both coveted and increasingly popular and harder to get and more expensive. And yet, mostly people still don't really actually know what it is. They couldn't articulate it in a sentence. Of course, conversations or ideas around worms come up as part of the package. So help us kind of move through this contradiction. And then if you can, just give us like a high level working definition so that we can understand the subject matter that we're going to be covering.
Sure. So mezcal in a nutshell refers to all spirits distilled from agave from Mexico. So in the world, there are approximately 220 species of agave. In Mexico, about 40 species are used in the production of mezcal, and the large majority of the biodiversity of agaves is located in Oaxaca, which is why Oaxaca is generally the starting point for talking about mezcal. Although there's a tradition of distilling agave in most of the country.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're talking about distilled agave, and as it relates to your work, we're particularly talking about Oaxaca and regionality, place. This is, of course, central to all of our work at Whetstone, terroir, origin. Help orient us in Oaxaca. Of course, it is not the only place in Mexico in which agave or mezcal is produced, but it is a special place for mezcal production. So can you orient us a little bit in Oaxaca and its specialness?
Yes, so Oaxaca is the most biodiverse state of Mexico. Like I mentioned before, we're working with over 40 species of agave. The state of Oaxaca can be broken down into about 16 different producing regions. It's also home to 16 different ethno-linguistic groups. Those ethno-linguistic groups don't correlate exactly to the 16 different regions of mezcal production, but you get a sense of the incredible diversity. One of the reasons for that biocultural diversity has to do with geography, of course. So we have the Sierra Madre del Sur, which is a range, a mountain range that extends throughout the state to the south, which is where Max and I work with Neta. And then there's the Sierra Norte. So we have all of these natural geographic barriers or circumstances which have made it possible for all these different indigenous groups to coexist, and without, in some cases, cross-contaminating, and not contaminating in a pejorative sense, but like
Sure.
without mixing necessarily until fairly recently, when certain roads started to connect, roads and trade routes start to connect different communities.
Got you. Yeah, and it's not really possible to talk about a culinary, cultural, or gastronomic experience in Oaxaca without summoning the indigenous communities, specifically around maize, as we well know. So, all right, let's bring this into then a contemporary context before we start tasting. Mezcal, it's a thing that we see on cocktail menus. Again, it is a increasing, pervasive thing in our culture at restaurants. What high level, just like broadly speaking, when we're looking at mezcal on a restaurant menu in anywhere in some urban epicenter in Western Europe or the US, let's say, what are the mezcals that we're traditionally looking at on the menu, and how, if at all, do those mezcals differ from the mezcals that you rep at Neta?
So I would say that some of the first mezcals that enter the market in the States in like the 80s, 90s follow the tequila model, or follow the model of spirits that are made from grains or more renewable like sources. The lifespan of an agave in general is between 7 and 20 years. So that's how long it takes for the plant to be ready for harvest and to be made into mezcal. It is one life, so monocarpic. It doesn't just grow back. It's not like wine or wheat or many other things. So
That's
um,
critical.
that's critical. So
Hmm.
there's been a shift in the approach of mezcal in the market. What is often in your well is it can be an industrial processed or more industrial processed mezcal. So in the same way that tequila is processed, or it's this kind of hybrid artisanal mezcal, which is a brand that works with a network of maybe 15 to 50 different producers.
Hmm.
And these are batches that may be produced traditionally, so with native yeasts and potentially a double distilled or single distillation, and then they're batched. And what I mean by that is like you have these huge maybe cement or large containers, 50,000 liter containers. You're dumping all these different mezcales from all these different villages into one batch, and then you're proofing it down to a certain ABV.
Hmm.
So that is the way that a lot of the bigger brand artisanal mezcals are being produced.
Right. And
The
what happens, sorry to cut you off, but just so
Mhm.
people are following along, what that means is that even if you are a tremendously careful, talented, attentive grower, if you are in a system where you're selling into, is it fair to call it a cooperative or selling up kind of upstream,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't allow all of the care and nuance to come through in the final product, right? So these blended mezcals kind of take on a more uniform profile. Is that right?
That's right, and I think that there's definitely parallels in the wine world with big cooperative negociants.
Hmm.
So this is a model that is being reproduced in mezcal. The
Hmm.
way that we work is a little bit different. We treat each batch as an individual cuvee. So to put it in wine terms, so
Hmm.
we the way that traditional mezcal is proofed in the community that we work in is through the pearl formation, the bubbles.
Hmm.
So people literally will if I shake this mezcal and you look at the bubbles, people are looking for something called the cordón cerrado. So this is very important.
Cordón cerrado.
So you have a jicara. So this is like this little kind of gourd-like thing,
Hmm.
and so through a venencia, which is a kind of like bamboo reed type tool, I'm letting the mezcal drop into this gourd, and I'm seeing how the bubbles form.
Hmm.
And what you want is a full like this guy needs to be full of this like hot beehive like bubble formation, and that is a cordon cerrado, and that is
Okay.
how people proof.
Okay.
So we don't proof anything down. We don't mix anything. We're not like, oh yeah, we have neta espadín, and neta espadín is always 45% alcohol, and it's X recipe. It's like, yeah, there's you'll see it's neta espadín, neta bicuish, but on the back label you have all the information about the producer, the year, the month, the fermentation, and full batch details. So
Hmm.
they're completely unique and
Hmm.
irreproducible.
Exactly.
And so we try to really talk about terroir, talk about the specificity of the batch, the time of year that it was produced, the type of soil that the agaves were growing on,
Hmm.
and to promote the work of each craftsperson and and the qualities of the plants themselves.
Definitely. It's all about distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said that it's worth mentioning that the USA is the biggest importer with 70% in 2020. I'm going to assume that number is correct. But yeah, worth being said that as we're talking broadly about kind of the impact or influence on the consumer side, a lot of that demand is coming from the US. And again, we don't really broadly speaking, even know what it is that we're drinking. So this is a good education for us. Speaking of drinking, I think it's time.
Okay,
All
let's
right.
start.
So I don't know how you want to do this, but I think what would be helpful for people if is like, um, let's say that you're lucky enough to be in a place where you have nice mezcal, and I got my little copita here from Anna. Thank you, Anna, who gave me this copita. And I have a biquiche and a madre quiche, which are two of these varieties of the many varieties that you referenced. Um, how should we taste this? Do you want to start?
Let's do Madre Quiche and then let's do Biquiche. I think that's
Okay.
great that you have these two because Madre Quiche I would call a heirloom varietal. And so Madre Quiche, Madre Quiche and Biquiche are the common names for different varietals of the species of agave Karwinski. So in Miwatlan, we work with 9 species of plants, 8 species of agave and 1 which is Dacylarian, which is not an agave. And then I like to think of it as the last name. So we're all related, and so now we're it's like Stephen and Niki Karwinski, and we're gonna try Madre Quiche Karwinski and Biquiche Karwinski. And
Okay.
Madre Quiche is a varietal that has been preserved by folks and reproduced by folks in Miwatlan and Ehudla. So you don't find Madre Quiche outside of these regions unless somebody has, taken them and replanted them elsewhere.
So this is uniquely Oaxacan.
This is uniquely Oaxacan and unique to Miwatlan and Ehudla.
Miwatlan and Hubla.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is a cultivated Karwinski. Biquiche is wild, but it can also be cultivated.
Okay.
So let's taste some Madre Quiche.
Let's taste some Madre Quiche.
I have this.
You can just pretend. And
I
then
can pretend this is a Madre Quiche, yeah.
And for people who might be like, oh, Mr. Satterfield, I thought you were a sommelier. Why are you drinking this mezcal out of plastic water bottles? What is the culture around really fine mezcals being packaged like this?
It's a matter of storage, and glass is expensive and it's scarce. So, if you're going to take a couple of liters, we're often, reusing water bottles. And a lot of the samples that we take from Logoche come in little water bottles.
Yeah, I find it quite charming. I thought it worth mentioning. And that's actually how I really love to taste mezcal. But I'm just being cute with my.
You're being cute with your copita. Well, I think it's like with wine. We're gonna go in the same way. We're just gonna be like, "Ooh, what does it look like?"
Mm-hmm.
It's needs to be transparent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the legs here, seeing what the oils are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Gonna take a whiff. You don't want to snort too much because it might go up your nose, and it's also a lot of alcohol.
Yeah, you gotta chill. This is high proof.
Exactly.
And so, are there in the way of wine, and part of me, wine background, also common language? Are there words, descriptors that are often used with Madre Quiche, or things that you smell that let you know, oh, I think I'm smelling a Madre Quiche?
Yeah.
What are those?
So some of the things I associate with Madre Quiche are green peanuts. There's beets, roots, ginseng. There's just an earthiness to Madre Quiche.
So it's got this earthy, spicy profile. The peanuts actually is one that I have to name specifically, in that when I was in Oaxaca at the palenques and tasting, that really for me was the pervasive kind of tasting note and aroma profile of Madre Quiche. It smelled a lot like peanuts. And actually, as you know, in Oaxaca, I have some of these peanuts here.
Oh yeah, those are the best.
These are the best peanuts.
They are. There's tons of peanuts growing all over Oaxaca, especially on the coast.
Yeah, so I kind of like that as a complimentary. Of course, you would see this on the table in many bars or most bars that you go to in Oaxaca anyway.
Hmm.
So I love that there's like a complimentary tasting note there. Okay,
Hmm.
so um, how how is yours tasting? Like, what is your experience right now?
Well, I actually don't have a Madre in front of me.
Oh,
I'm
okay,
tasting an Espadín Bicuish, but
okay.
yeah, Madre Quiche. What I'd like to say about Madre Quiche, which is one of the reasons why we love her so much, is that we have mother in the name, so Madre,
Hmm.
Mother Quiche, and one of the theories that we have about the reason why it's called Madre Quiche is because the pollination, or I mean the flowering time for Madre Quiche overlaps with a lot of other species, and for
Hmm.
some reason she has this genetic potential. So when you look at the inflorescence of an agave, it's like a candelabra. You have all these different
Hmm.
flowers, pods, and the main accomplice to pollination are bats, which is why
Mm.
they're so tall. So you can have these like, 10-foot, 12-foot tall inflorescence. And
Wow.
so it's you can have all these little like flower bunches pollinated, cross pollinated by different pollinators and with different plants. So
Hmm.
when you plant maricuish seed, it's like a piñata. You don't know what you're going to get.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
when people are growing out the seed, maybe only 30% resembles the mother plant.
Hmm.
Everything
Wow.
else is like crazy hybrids. You have coyote, you have different types of Karwinski, Cuiche Verde, for example, which is a hybrid varietal that can only be born of Madre Cuiche seed because
Mm.
it's sterile.
Gotcha.
Tobasiche. So
On
that's
and
another
on. See,
reason.
this is why we
Yeah.
need this podcast because you might be
Hmm.
feeling confident, like, oh, I've had an Espadine or three. I know mezcal, and then you
Yeah.
talk to Nikki, and you're like, I'm at the beginning of the journey.
Yeah.
We should name that we have some homies who are tuning in, which warms my heart. The homie Gabrielle Etienne, and I saw that Fabi and Karis are here, and also yeah, there's a funny but relevant question around peanuts from Gabrielle, who asked, "Are we talking about wild peanuts on the beach?"
They're not wild. They are cultivated, but there's a lot of peanuts in front of the beach in
Nearby,
Oaxaca, nearby,
nearby. So
nearby.
yeah, they still must be farmed and cultivated. Although I'd be interested in that. Okay, so let's just humor me since we're not drinking the same thing. I'm being selfish,
Okay,
but humor me because I want to go on to this the bequiche,
yeah, let's do the
um,
bequiche.
which I got from Paula, and
Yes, I love that bequiche from Paula.
this is a beautiful, and it says 49%
Hmm.
ABV. So same thing, like help us understand if we see bequiche versus madre quiche, what are the differences in the profile or in the production? Like how should we kind of think about this particular variety?
So they are different morphologically, although they are cousins. So Madre Quiche is a little bit shorter to the ground and rounder, and then Bequiche are these tall guys. Bequiche is the quintessential Miwatlan expression. Bequiche can be seen growing in clusters across the landscape. They're often used to delimit property lines, or they're used
Mm.
along the roads so that your chivos, that your goats don't come through and decimate your crops. There
Hmm.
is a lot of animal husbandry and pasturing happening before the mezcal boom in a lot of these communities.
Gotcha.
So bequiche has been a source of fiber, food, sustenance for arguably thousands of years.
Hmm. Wow,
And
love that history.
yeah, and we love bequiche. Bequiche is
Yeah,
best. And you're
it
going to
is the best.
see, especially with this one, you got this was growing on one of Paula's parcels, which has a lot of copal trees.
And
So
tell
copal.
us about Paula, because she's a very talented woman who's making mezcal, which is in itself a notable thing, right?
Yeah, Paula is yeah, an incredible producer, multi-generational mezcal producer. She lost her father at a young age and was taught by her older brother how to make mezcal. Entered the palenque space at 8 years old. And that means, you know, going out to the field. She is very skillful with a machete. So going out and harvesting agave from the field, bringing them in wheelbarrows to the palenque, assembling the oven, distilling everything. And a lot of the skill and the craft has to do with understanding fermentation, understanding, you know, the type of heat that you need to apply for specific species. And yeah, she is one of the first maestras or mezcaleros that we started to work with. Her husband is Hermogenes Vasquez, who's also a fantastic producer, and their
Yeah.
teenage son, Jorge, who's 17, is now
Going
also,
on 70.
yeah, now producing some fantastic mezcal as well. We just released a father-son production in New York,
I
which is
love
great.
that. I
Mm-hmm.
love that. Okay, so we're like 30 minutes in. I just want to give people a chance to stretch. Um, you know, obviously we're not all drinking mezcal together, which is unfortunate. Although, actually, why don't you go ahead and plug Neta? This is a great time to do that. If people are green with envy that they're not drinking mezcal with us right now, how can you help them course correct?
Yeah, you can follow us at Neta Spirits on IG. Up on our website, we have a place where you can find out where we are. We're available in a lot of states in the United States. We're also available in Europe. Um, and there's a lot of tiny little batches spread around everywhere. So,
So don't delay, and also don't fall
yeah.
in love. This is one of the things about mezcal that I love. It keeps me humble and disciplined,
Hmm.
in that too much of a good thing is a bad thing, right?
Hmm.
And like sometimes stuff runs out, and
Yeah.
it's good for us to kind of change our relationship to desire
Yeah.
around the availability
Yeah.
and
Some of these,
specialness.
exactly. Most of our average batch size is around 200 liters. So really, most of the things that you'll find are, you know, bottlings of 200 bottles, 300 bottles. So
Hmm.
it's, you know, it's real
Limited,
small,
limited.
and everything is bottled and labeled on site by the maestros themselves.
Hmm.
Um, so you know that you're drinking it as they drink it in the pueblo.
Yeah, literally from the source.
Yeah.
That's what's up, and that is, I mean, right now we're having a conversation about mezcal, but ostensibly about your podcast as well.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things that I want to just note is that even though we're having a conversation, we are going to bring a lot of these stories, these human-centered stories, forth in a way that is not just conversational, but with rich soundscapes, transportive soundscapes, so that you all feel that you're actually in these palenques with Niki, with these producers. So this is just a little preview of that in language and in vocabulary alone. Just want to manage expectations for y'all. Okay, so maybe we should take questions. It's 2:35 my time, 4:34 your time. Does anyone have questions for Niki about Mezcal, about this podcast? Have questions for me? I can answer questions. Whetstone Radio Collective. Let's see. How many liters does a producer do yearly? I think the question is maybe perhaps around like an average
Hmm.
production size.
So
Do you know
most of the
anything about that?
producers that we work with produce between 600 and 2,000 liters a year.
Okay. 600 to 2,000 liters. So that's not very
Hmm.
much. That's
No.
really quite small.
Hmm.
Um, Is there anything that you would like to share with us, impart on us, based on um, the show, based on Netta, your experience, your hopes, your vision for the podcast? Anything you want to leave with the people?
Yeah, I am so excited to have the opportunity to explore mezcal traditions outside of the community that I work in as well,
Mm-hmm.
and to center the voices of the folks who have been resisting and fighting and making it possible for us to drink this today.
Yes.
There are some really incredible people here on the ground that have been working diligently for many years, for a lot longer than I have, to educate folks. Something I didn't mention before is that, mezcal was highly regulated and criminalized up until the 1980s. So we're really entering a new era where this is a product that really didn't leave the communities of production, and that is entering into the marketplace. So it is a critical moment, and it's a time that bringing our awareness to can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And what's the story behind that criminality with mezcal? Like, you see it sometimes with different brands, like reflecting back that illicit period. What was the history with that?
So there's different eras of I wouldn't say prohibition, but of regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So from the colonial period, there's I think it was Carlos III, King of Spain, who started to limit the licenses granted towards folks for the distillation of agave, to avoid competition from Spanish imports of brandy.
Mm-hmm.
And then during the period, the 70-year period of Porfirio Diaz's rule, he was very much influenced by positivism and considered alcohol a barrier to progress. So
Sure can be.
also, yeah, so also criminalized and highly regulated the production of spirits. The first license to produce agave distillate was granted to Jose Cuervo in 1795, and this was the creation of the first kind of monopoly on agave distillation in Mexico. And so we're in a period of kind of undoing that, or of changing that. And there's still a lot of barriers to the sale of mezcal from small communities and from small producers in Mexico. And so those are some of the things that we'll be exploring as well.
I love that. I like that. Someone has a question related to the production cycle, and they're asking what happens to the waste / the fibers. Of course, this very fibrous spent material, the agave. So what happens? Does anything?
Yeah, so the spent bagasso or agave fiber is used in the oven. So when you're constructing the oven, which is shaped like a funnel, it's a conical earthen oven. You're building the fire in the bottom, and you're putting stones on top, and then once you're ready to cook, you're in the case, I'm not going to speak for everywhere, but in the case of where we are, you're adding dampened agave fiber as a barrier between the hot stones and the agave piñas. And then you're layering that on top again, and then you're adding dirt. So that's one way. Before the widespread introduction and adaptation towards kind of like nylon and plastics, when people used the fiber extracted from the leaves to make rope. So there's one agave that we work with called Jabali. It was not used in agave production until recently, until the past maybe 10 years, because before it was used principally for fiber production, and the ropes were called jabalinas.
And jabali is so delicious too. So I'm glad that someone
Yes.
figured that out. Shout out to that person. So I think that is all the questions that I saw. I just want to, again, first of all, thank you, Niki. As everyone can see, you are a font of knowledge. That is why we're looking forward to this podcast. Honored to be in production with you, my dear friend. And for everyone who's watching or will watch later on, I'm just asking you to please consider, if you can, supporting Whetstone Radio Collective in this new endeavor to bring over a dozen podcasts to the market this fall. That's very soon. We're already working hard on these shows, and we would appreciate some amplification and funding if you can. But appreciate the support and y'all tuning in and y'all supporting Whetstone. Thank you for all of the love on High on the Hog. It is received and felt and appreciated. And yeah, thanks for hanging out on a Monday. Anything else you want to say, Niki?
No, thank you so much, Stephen. I am so thrilled and really just excited to be on this journey with other people who I feel like are truly like-minded and who are creating a space for other voices to be heard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Just starting. All right. Much love to you, Chica. I talk
Much
soon.
love.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.